George Groves versus Chris Eubank Jr. In this video, I will discuss the key factors of this fight along with my own prediction. But before that, I want to ask you to stick your neck on the line and make your prediction in the comment section below. Are you picking George Groves or are you picking Chris Eubank Jr.? And how do you think this fight will go? Remember, while you're at it, please remember to subscribe to this channel. So we've got George Groves, we've got Chris Eubank Jr. They're competing in the semi-finals of the World Boxing Super Series in the middleweight weight class. And for me, this is one of the most anticipated fights taking place here in the UK in 2018. And it brings together two world champions competing for versions of the IBO and the WBA Super Middleweight titles. You know, on one side, we've got George Groves, a fighter who had 4 attempts to pick up his first world championship, and he's fought in some of the biggest events the UK has put on in the huge Froch 2 fight that took place at Wembley Stadium. And he's a boxer with a wealth of experience, having shared the ring and beaten numerous previous champions to be, or championship contenders. And he's going up against the son of a legend who's made a name for himself in Chris Eubank Jr., a fighter who's been in the spotlight from day one with a televised debut. But, you know, he's gone about it his own way without bowing to anyone, and he's brought an arrogance and a swagger to the scene that breeds excitement that we all love. And whilst this will be his biggest fight to date, he has been schooled along the way in a variety of interesting opponents and fights, including a jump up in weight a couple of years ago to take the IBO title. And, you know, I like this fight because it brings together two fighters of supreme confidence. We know that the way the Eubanks go about things, but, you know, George Groves has shown confidence from day one in his battles with DeGale, and the way that he went about the Carl Froch fight. We all remember that classic press conference when he said he's gonna, you know, go to the center of the ring and hit him with 2 right hands. And then just the way that that fight panned out, the way it started, and you see all the memes that kind of evolved. I mean, it was pretty impressive prediction. But anyway, this fight, it can be spoken about and discussed on, I think, 4 real factors here. We've got the size, we've got the experience factor, we've got the power factor, and the skill and how it all blends together to create this fight. So let's talk about the size. Now, we know that George Groves is going to be the bigger man. We saw this at the press conference. He was bigger and he was taller. And it will be interesting to see how the differential at the weigh-in, when we get closer to the fight, how much bigger George Groves is, or whether, you know, Chris Eubank Jr. Swells up. We'll have to see, okay? Because I've always thought that Groves is a fairly big and hefty super middleweight, and I've always thought he was possibly capable of jumping up to light heavyweight. Whether we'll ever see that, we might do, okay? But the interesting thing about the size is that this will be the biggest opponent Chris Eubank has ever faced. Okay, he's fought other super middleweights, but none of them were that big. You know, Abraham, someone who competed at middleweight himself, and most of the middleweights that he has contended against have been natural middleweight opponents. Okay, so there is going to be that problem that Eubank has to tackle in fighting his biggest opponent to date, and how he how that challenge sets it in front of him. The next thing we've got to talk about here is the experience, because this is fairly one-sided, because we know Groves has a wealth of experience in you know, the events, huge events, and also opponents. But we talk about, you know, some of the undercards of the David Haye fights, the DeGale fight, the super fights against Carl Froch. He's he's been in there and had real the spotlight shone on him, and he coped with it fairly well. But he's also been in there with a wealth of different opponents, high caliber opponents that have done it, opponents that then went on to do it in James DeGale. But he has fought some serious opponents, and whilst he has lost some of the bigger fights, he has got some sturdy, solid victories against some high level opponents. And we have to consider how Eubank will really cope with this fight, because despite the fact that he has been on the spotlight since day one, he hasn't really had a super fight to date. We can look back at the Billy Joe Saunders fight and say that's a really good fight, and despite the fact that he lost that, we know that Billy Joe Saunders went on to become a world champion, and we've seen some of the performances he's put on. But despite that, Chris Eubank Jr. hasn't really had the real super fights to really contend with until this moment. So we have to see how that will go. And we have to consider, with George Groves, whilst he has got that experience, has he been in there with anyone that brings the intensity and the output of a Eubank? Cox kind of tried it, but then he got worn down pretty quickly himself. Okay, so we're now talking about the power, and I think most people would say George Groves has the advantage when it comes to power. He has more stoppages. He's shown more of a ability to land concussive punches, whereas Eubank has been more of a tiring down the opponent, really kind of destroying their will and then getting the stoppages. Okay, but how does this fight really blend together? Okay, now we've seen that George Groves can fight to a game plan, and he can box exceptionally well. Okay, and we saw Billy Joe Saunders outbox Chris Eubank for large portions of that fight. However, we know that Chris Eubank has improved and shown a more of an ability to close the distance with his opponents. However, on the other side of that, he has not fought the highest caliber of opponents since then. So we have to talk about, can George Groves outbox Chris Eubank? Now, even in the early days, we saw George Groves outbox James DeGale in a fairly surprising performance for many. But since then, Groves has got many stoppages, but he's also put on some clinics and some boxing masterclasses where it's been a complete shutout against numerous opponents, and some of them fairly decent operators themselves. But we have seen Chris Eubank Jr. wear out opponents with body shots, pressure, uppercuts. So you would assume that George Groves would not want to fight on the inside. He'd want to box and move, fight on the outside, show his skills. But we know that he's a warrior, and he's not afraid of a scrap. He's not afraid to get in there. He's not afraid to, put his chin on the line to try and hurt his opponent. And that's a big, big thing for me. I can see this becoming a scrap. I really can see this becoming a scrap rather than a boxing masterclass. I can see it being a scrap. I can see it being a very grueling, tiring fight. And we have to see who will come out on top at the end of that. So for me, my prediction is that Chris Eubank Jr. edges this one. The work rate, the sheer stamina, and the intensity will get him through and wear down George Groves to take these straps and move forward in this tournament to take on the opponent, the winner of the other semi-final. And for me, in this one, as I say, Chris Eubank Jr. wears down George Groves and gets a stoppage. Whether it's a one-puncher, I think it's going to be another grueling wear down, beat down. I think it's going to be possibly not a beat down, but it's going to be a very kind of close fight. It's going to be scrappy. It's going to be tiring, and there's going to be some brutal punches thrown, some real brutal punches we're going to see in this fight, which is going to ultimately lead with Chris Eubank Jr. having that stamina in the tank and taking George Groves possibly all the way, but I feel there is a stoppage that can be taken for Chris Eubank Jr. So that is the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. What is your prediction? Who are you picking? Are you picking George Groves or are you picking Chris Eubank Jr.? Let me know you're picking in the description below, and I'll see you on the next video.